with no further ado, I would like to hand the spotlight over to Richard.
Well, thank you. And this is really great. It's been a very, very long time since I've actually been in a room with everybody, and I've been really busy trying to do a whole lot of things and not able to spend as much time as I would like to on the social elements, which are some of the nicer parts of this industry, because there are some really great people, many of them watching right now, I hope. So you had asked for a little bit of background on Parasound, how it came to be, what that was about. And I think it'll actually be somewhat relevant to everything that I talk about subsequently. So I'm happy to dig into that. And I'll make this as brief as I can. Usually it's about a 3-hour tome, but I'll do better than that. Phil knows I'm not exaggerating. So this all started because of music. And you're going to hear me end whatever it is that I say about how, the importance of music and the one thing that we share in common, all that stuff. But it was really all about music. And I'm going to make this as fast as I can. I grew up in a Chicago suburb. When I was 9, my parents enrolled me in a preparatory piano program at Northwestern University. I used to ride a bicycle down in the summer. Our house wasn't air conditioned, but 3 blocks from the music building was an Allied radio store. It was air conditioned. One day I walked into this store, and I think I was probably 10 years old. No, it'd have to be 11. Yeah, 11. And just they were selling parts and things, but the back room, there's a demo room, and there's a couple there, and the manager is demoing for them. And this is the only time, this is when stereo was only available on 7.5-inch 2-track tape. And I can remember what they were demoing. It was a Stan Kenton piece that was recorded in 1957 called Intermission Riff. Not the greatest piece of music, but for somebody of my age, and just one, this thing was just a wonder. So that was kind of the launch of that interest. And I found out pretty soon that I was much better at audio than I was at playing piano, to my parents' chagrin, but that's how it is. And so this thing about music, I was just dumbfounded by how wonderful it was. And it was a simple Ampex recorder and 2 of the powered Ampex speakers with I think powering, 10 watts per channel, but it sounded live. So that's kind of element number 1. And then I started reading all the magazines, the ones that were available at the time. I can't even remember half of the names of them, but I've got a whole lot of them in the warehouse that'll probably be up for auction when I get around to doing a fundraiser with some of the things that are my old treasures. The second thing that occurred that informs what's going on is that there was a Masonic auditorium a block from where I went to middle school. And I stumbled into this one day, and what was going on there was one of the very, very rare live versus recorded demos. In this case, it was the Fine Arts Quartet, which was Chicago's greatest. And they would play, and then they would stop playing, and the electronics would work, but they'd keep miming it. So what the electronics were, and I remember this, was AR1s, Dyna Mark IIs, and Ampex for a source. And this is when people were oohing and ahhing. They couldn't hear the difference. Well, people in the early 20th century said the same thing about Caruso recordings. Can't hear the difference. Well, it's kind of a moving target. But that really got me, and just the sheer good fortune of being there nailed for me that all I want to do is bring music into people's homes, and that's actually all I've ever done. And so I'm really lucky to be able to do what I wanted to do, and every year is actually more exciting than the year before, and that's been a really long run. So that's what the background of it is. Without the music, we don't count, we don't matter. With the music, we're essential in my view. So, okay, so that's the background. All right, I'm into audio, I build kits. I found out very quickly to have more respect for high B plus in a vacuum tube amplifier when you so easily blow it up when you first turn it on. I'm sure that's the only person it's ever happened to. So, and one thing led to another, and I started doing custom install when I got my driver's license. Then I moved out here to go to Cal Berkeley because out-of-state tuition at that time was $600 a year, and that was a lot more attractive than the $3,000 a year Ivy schools. I also wouldn't have had a chance of getting into any of them. So in my sophomore year, I was running low on money, and I wandered down about 3/4 of a mile from the campus to this store that mostly sold TV replacement tubes and had other parts. And in the back room was a little bitty demo room for audio. And I walked in there and I said, "Well, this is pretty cool." So who could I talk to about applying for a job? And so it had 3 owners, and the gruffest one takes me to an upstairs room. He said, "I don't want you wasting my time. Tell me, what do you know about this stuff?" Okay, picture here to here, Vietnam era, not a lot of humility. And I looked him in the face and I said, "Probably more than you do." Turned out I did, and that was okay. And I got in return $1.75 an hour as a stock boy, which immediately became mounting cartridges, putting wood cabinets on receivers and things like that. And I would have paid them for that job just to be able to do it. It was a bonus to be able to make money off of it. And then one day, somebody in the store wasn't there. Would you like to could you help us sell something? I never sold anything in my life. That changed pretty quickly. Turned out I really liked it. And one of the big discoveries from that was finding out that customers were much more grateful to me or the company for the pleasure we brought them than I was grateful to take their money. And it's kind of been that way ever since, in my career at least. But that was really indelible and showed me how important things were. So that moved on, and then by the way, for Bernie's sake, that was the original store. I was in terms of the salesman's codes, I was 03. The first one was my boss, Ted Bennett. He was 01. Hank Hong, guy known to everybody in the East Bay, was 02, and I was 03. So then I moved on and became a manager of a store, kind of the usual stuff. And that was a lot of fun. Same stuff going on. And one thing led to another. And I'll save a lot of verbiage by saying, oh, by the way, I was going to actually wear this, but anybody who's old enough might remember these treasures. Yeah, well, it was a different time. You're not going to pimp me about this on Monday, are you?
Oh yeah, you're good.
All right. So this was an amazing education, and so the company was growing, going into Southern California. We had quite a few stores in Northern California, and in 1972, the company was sold to CBS when CBS was an enormous entity. The brightest billboard in the Ginza was CBS Sony, because they had a joint venture for material and hardware, looking at us for that. And so at the age of 22, is that right? 26, I became a vice president of CBS by virtue of that acquisition. And that was like, oh, okay, there's a bonus. But where it paid off, and what's relevant to today, is that while we'd always had house brand speakers, we didn't have worthy electronics. And so that became my task. And I started going to Japan to find a factory. I ended up going there about 3 times a year for 10 years. And where this bears on Parasound is, I learned how things get built. And it's not always the way one would seem. So, basically, figuring out what's a trading company that pretends to be a factory versus the real factory. And a very vivid example of that is, I was taken one day on a train to northern Honshu. It was a foggy day. It looked like a Kurosawa movie. And I was taken to a fisherman's house. And the minute I walked in, I could smell a very, very familiar smell. At the end of the hall is a fairly large room with a dozen ladies around a solder pot. And that day they were making circuit boards for Sansui. And so, okay, I'm really learning something now. But that was really really important. So I did all of that until I actually ceded my position to John Faulkner. Some of you probably know him, who was a really super tech at Pacific. And I was tasked to be vice president of long-term planning. Well, Phil's wet his pants because I can't do long planning to save my life. They got the wrong guy. But the biggest honor of all that was being able to make a presentation to the board. When William Paley was still alive, and he was very much the brilliant person that built that whole enterprise, the whole network. But as it went along, as happens to CBS acquisitions, they got impatient. They started flooding us with accountants, and it was just not. It wasn't fun anymore. It was the wrong message. So I left there in 1980 with a whole lot of connections and a whole lot of knowledge, and didn't quite know what I was doing. I came home and told my wife, and I figuring she's be upset. She said, "Good, now you got a chance to go up to Tahoe and learn how to ski better." But since I'm bred to work, I didn't do that. But I dwelled on this for a moment because I think, and I would have mentioned this later on, what separates Parasound from any other brand that I know is that, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only individual that was fortunate enough to be simultaneously a retailer and a manufacturer. And the benefits of that were extraordinary. One of the things that you learn if you're effective at retail is you listen more than you talk, and you pay attention to people, and you make things right. And certain things, like you don't put a button on the front panel if you can't hear it when you push it, and things like that. And the product has to be reliable, and people have to be taken care of. No matter how good your warranty is, unless people are taking care of you graciously, that doesn't much matter. So everything about that has informed everything that we do at Parasound. I never forgot that. And the directness of it, because we were so big and everybody was really cocky, there was nothing else in the world that came close to the size. We had 103 stores eventually, God knows how many states. But literally my door was always open. Somebody had a gripe about something. Well, if you picture any piece of equipment, and let's say there's a glitch in it, customer's unhappy, he comes and he tells the salesman that sold him, goes to the store manager. We're already in the chain of telephone. The store manager is going to probably call his local rep. One more step. The local rep is going to call the regional sales manager. More opportunities for change. Who's going to take it to the main sales manager, who's going to take it to a vice president of something, who's going to take it to the president of something, who does not dare send that message back to the Japanese. So things didn't really change. And having sold some products that were lovely, but real losers, like the Luxman products that we were selling for a long time, boy, they just couldn't hold together to save their lives. They sounded great, but they just didn't get it. So the message was, make it right the first time, and make it right with the customers. And you're all familiar enough. You've either had experiences with us, or you've certainly read about that. That's exactly what we do. And I got a lot of good ideas from the floor. I don't have all the good ideas. I poached them off of people who bequeathed them to me. And a lot of that is reflected in Parasound, the value orientation of the brand, the fact that it's pretty bulletproof. And I don't even know how many amps that we built in the 80s are still in use. As far as I know, many of them, people like to come up to me at a show. Remember shows? They were really fun. And say, I've got this HC800, from 1984, and it sounds just like it did. That makes me just as happy as somebody telling me that he's got, some JC1 pluses and how great they are. Well, not exactly the same, but you get the idea. So all of that is our culture. Everybody in the company ascribes to that. And what we do is we try to get things right the first time. And we learned a long time ago, let's say somebody isn't making his case strong enough. Maybe it's not listened to carefully. And so there's going to be a phone call. That person's going to be really, really unhappy. 8 calls later, when there's a lot of animosity, we realize we could have taken care of that customer in the first place, saved hundreds of hours possibly, and a whole lot of money, and lost goodwill. So Parasound, essentially anybody who can pick up the phone is empowered to solve a problem by whatever means that might be. If we mess up shipping something, and I remember we had an A51 with the shipping weight of 94 pounds or something like that, incredible, that didn't go out fast enough for an install. So we overnighted that. Philip, what did that cost us? $900 to ship?
$158.
And so, so we saved a lot of money. Now, the other place, the other way that this becomes interesting is we're very frugal. We have a very small staff. Everybody's overworked. We have a very, very modest facility. We don't have a fancy listening room in there. There's not a, not a lounge. It's just all business. Being in San Francisco, which is among the highest cost of living places in the country, if not more so, we can't afford to have that many employees, which means every employee has to live his or her weight. So if you look at it from a standpoint of somebody calls, he's got a problem, that person solves it for him. That's one thing. Let's say you had a dishwasher, or a refrigerator or something, and it craps out. You call, whatever the company is, and you're going to hear from a script. Nothing, that person's not authorized to do anything other than read a script, and nobody is happy at the end of that conversation. Customer is certainly pissed, but the person who has been trying to represent the company has just been bludgeoned. I mean, it's debilitating. So the question is, how much do you think those people want to go to work the next day, and how effective are they going to be? Well, you can figure out for yourselves. In our case, because anybody was empowered to take care of the problem essentially on the first call, they're getting attaboys all day long. How much do you think that person wants to come to work the next day and get all the praise? And it's pretty easy to figure that out. So that's how we treat people. I mean, it's because we should, but we learned that that's what you have to do if you're going to survive in the long term and keep your your reputation intact. And that's like everything for us. And Phil's kind of nodding inside because he knows, he's a master at taking care of people, and he helps others figure out how to do that as well. But when anybody can solve a problem and we take care of it, it really sets us apart from, I know a lot of other manufacturers, and I'm very friendly with many of them. I don't know of any that go to the lengths that we do to keep people happy. I'm sure there's somebody, but I haven't met him or her yet. So all of this builds, a picture of a company that's very, very focused on customers. When the company was really started, I was doing some consulting in between leaving Pacific Stereo and starting Parasound. And by the way, sneak preview, you're going to hear us talk about our 40th anniversary, which is in September. I just want to put in a pitch that I know of no company. There may be one or two companies that are older than we are. I think probably Macintosh was from the 50s. But I don't know of any company that's under the original ownership, much less the original owner. And there's a continuity there that just doesn't exist in audio. And it may be because I was too stupid to go do something else, but I still love this. And I think it's essential that it's just really a mindset that I want it all to be right. I don't want anything to be compromised. And I like the reputation of the company, and it makes it easier for everybody that works for us to do their jobs. So this is really a big part of what's behind the scenes. And sometimes this is like you don't necessarily want to know how the sausage gets made, but it really tastes good. And sometimes it feels that way, but this is what we do. So that launches us into basically current time. Now, I want to take a break and just find out if there was enough data in there that gives you an adequate background. Too much? If it's too little, I'm willing to go until 8 o'clock tonight. But Leslie, before I go on to the next step, what do you think?
That was good. Where did you come up with the name?
Parasound?
Mm-hmm.
So easy. When I was consulting, I shared an office space with a guy who had been my customer at one point. His name was Bernie Krause, in the Wharfside building by Fisherman's Wharf, with a great view of the cable car turnaround and the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. And Bernie's business was primarily to produce music. One of the things that he made was the None Such Guide for Electronic Music. And they were under the Parasound label. That was his. And he went on to do a lot of other things. You should actually do a Google search on Bernie Krause, who was living a mile down my rural road in Sonoma right now. And I needed a name. We were actually going to go to a consumer electronics show. I didn't know what to call it. And so I bought the Parasound name from him. At the time, I thought it was really clumsy. It sounded too much like Panasonic, but nobody knew about it yet. So I'd like to say I created a great name, but I just bought a great name from a guy. And as it went along, now that it's well known, I'm sure anybody in the audio community is much more familiar with Parasound than they are Panasonic. So I feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well played.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. So we do have some questions in the chat, or which you can, do you see the chat?
Yes, I do. There's only 5 of you so far.
Here, let's see. There's some,
But
if you want
I
to,
see Fred. I see Fred's on the screen.
yeah, you got to pick a
This is
question.
actually, I'm really happy to have this question. Well, you're right. It is a little feature, but everybody wants it. But how many manufacturers do it? I can tell you, it doesn't cost very much to do this. It's pretty negligible, but you have to think about it and then do it. And that's really the only difference. So I could say that this comes out of my retail experience, where I heard from people, oh, this should have had that. We didn't need that, and things like that. And I sort of cataloged that. And if you look at most of our products, there's always a couple of things in there you just don't find in other brands. Again, just because we thought of it and they didn't. So I hope that answers the question. It was actually not a question. It was a compliment. Thank you.
Thank you. I always ask myself, who wants to have to remember to turn off their amps every time?
I never turn mine off. I love that feature. That's just in case people aren't reading the chat, that's the kind of auto sensing on off feature, which I think is terrific as well. Who wants to turn anything off? Did you want to hear the proper usage of gain controls on the back of the amp? That's also a good one.
Oh, sure. That's easy. Well, the gain controls at maximum are the actual gain, the gain of the amplifier. Most of our amplifiers are 29.4 dB, which is pretty much equivalent to THX standards. And we settled on that because we were a very early THX adopter. But in that case, the purpose of there's several purposes of having those gain controls. One of them is perhaps you've got a preamp with very, very high output. And if you've got the gain controls at max, you may find that preamp's volume control can't track left and right channels with precision. Well, with precision, because at the lower range of the rotation, they aren't the same. There's always going to be at least a half a dB off, and at some points, if the pot is almost all the way down, it could be 3 dB down. And so this gives an opportunity, if you were to turn down the gain on the amp, you maximize the gain on the amp so that you turn down the gain on the amp so that the preamp has to find itself in an optimum range, which is generally between 1130 and 1230, about the midpoint where any pot tracks the best. The other, perhaps of not as much consequence for people that are using an audio signal as a turn-on trigger, and if a piece of music starts very softly, and a lot of classical music does, it may take some time before the music gets louder before the amp decides to turn on. So the way we deal with that is we turn the gain down. So we have to turn the gain up on the preamp, and that's going to now give it enough to get itself going without any hesitation. Phil might know of another one I'm not thinking of offhand.
Oh, you covered it. That's good. Thank you.
You get to work another day for Parasound. Okay.
Thank you.
What's another one?
Larry posted one. Bill had a question. This is very long. I guess I can read the whole thing. Bill's question for Richard is, as a dedicated concept receiver collector, I have all models except the 2.0. Is if he has or knows of sources of historical information I could gather. Regional service, are these different questions, Larry? regional service trainer for Southern California and a service manager for the Santa Barbara and Ventura stores. He would like to know the name of Richard's 2 partners at Pacific Stereo. I think these are multiple
Well,
questions.
Yeah, those are 2 different
They're
questions.
2 different
as well.
questions. I know. And then there's another one. So let's do the first one.
Okay, I'll work backwards.
Yeah.
The founders of the company were a guy named Tom Anderson. That's the guy who hired me, and Charlie Haston. They both came out of General Electric. And then a younger partner, Ted Bennett, who was really my mentor and a really brilliant person. So those were the 3. And then I kind of tagged along as the junior, and my share of the company was minuscule compared to theirs, for good reason. So that gets that out of the way. Okay, Class D versus Class AB. Let's save it. It's going to probably be a little longer discussion than might seem on the surface. So don't go away. I'd like to address that later on.
Okay. And then there was the first question, sources of historical information having to do with the concept receiver collector.
Well, if you were to do a Google search on concept, any of the model numbers, there's actually quite a bit. And by the way, excuse me, for anybody who needs repair, there's a terrific guy in Southern California, and I'll be glad to hook you up with him because he's really honest and he gets how to do it. He can even refurbish, what the cosmetics look like on them. So I heartily recommend anybody. I might have a 2.0, by the way. I've got a couple 16.5s lurking around, but I think those are going to be buried with me when I die.
Okay, and then there's, I guess Lynn had a question. John Curl has designed upgraded versions of Parasound's top-of-the-line phono stage, JC3 Plus, and Power Amp JC1 Plus. Is he working on a new version of your outstanding JC2 preamp? In other words, should I buy the JC2 BP in the next 6 months or wait for the JC Plus?
That's a perfectly good question. I'll answer it by going backwards and saying anything John Kroll gets involved in, it could be 6 months from the time that we want him to test something before the time he gets around to it. So were there to be a successor product, it wouldn't be for a while. What I can say, we don't have it as a project right now. At this moment, we don't know how to make it better. It's still the quietest of all the line stage preamps that I know of, something like 116 dB, which is unheard of for a preamp. I talk to John frequently, and some of you have heard me say this before. Every time I talk to him, I learn something, or I learn about something that he's learning about. So he does have something in mind. It has to do with the input stages in driver stage. He thinks he's got a way to reduce 3 stages down to 2. That's all he can say about it. Whether this gets finished or not, there's something in the mix, and this is the first time Phil Jackson's hearing about this, but it's not a given thing. It's a possibility, but enjoy a JC2 BP. If we ever come up with a better one, I think you'll find the market is pretty welcoming of JC2s. Long answer, short question.
Okay. And Bob Walter had a question. What's the relationship between the Vendetta Phono Stage and the Parasound JC3 Plus?
That's easy. John Curl. They're actually a lot of the DNA is simple in some respects. The Vendetta was really pretty easy. It was moving magnet only, almost no controls of any sort, parts that would be considered a little bit out of fashion, not as good as they could be today, but it's still a contender. And I think a lot of it, I think what John had to deal with, with working for Mark Levinson was just abhorrent. But we welcome the comparisons, and I think the original Vendettas make a very, very good place to try to just be better than that. So I'm happy if anybody compares JC3 Plus to that in any way. There are a number of ways in which the JC Plus are far superior. First of all, newer parts, an AC line conditioner built into it, and a whole lot of other things that aren't into a Vendetta. Anybody who has the opportunity to get their hands on a Vendetta and wants to do an A/B comparison, I'd love to hear what you think about it. Too much answer?
No,
You're
that's
good.
good. How did you and John originally get connected? John Curl.
Well, yeah, no, I figured John. Well, we first met on an airport bus from the Tokyo airport in 1978. He didn't know who I was. I knew who he was. So we talked, and that was, I found out that, what are you doing there? Well, I'm going to be doing this. What are you doing? We're going to be doing that. So he was on his way to Shin Shirasuna, which was one of Harman's factories that they used to meet Matti Ojala, and they were working together on a citation product with Matti's newly hatched name, TIM, or I can't even say it now. I'm blanking out. This is something about smear. It'll come back to me. Sometimes words escape me.
Transient intermodulation distortion.
So that was that. But I had the opportunity to have a very interesting conversation with him, and we both ooh and ah over one of the first NSXs that was ever built. John came back into our lives when there was a woman working for Parasound. Her name was Karen Richardson, and she and John were very, very good friends. And so she told him what we were doing, and he said, "Well, their heart's really in the right place. I think I could help them." So this was early 1988, and the fact that he even thought us worthy of his consideration was really great. So we engaged him as a consultant. He has been our consultant ever since then. Certainly the longest running gig that he ever had, and probably longer than most people ever have. So that's how it got started. And the first project was the original HC8 2200, which had a lot of John's footprints all over it. And that was a very successful product, but not nearly as important as the products that we're doing now. And it's been a very, very difficult relationship. Sometimes John gets up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes John thinks you're not paying attention to him. And well, you've heard John. I mean, so we're definitely his longest running gig, and I've learned much more from him than I would have ever imagined. I think virtually every phone call, I'm learning something new from him, and I wish I could write it down as fast as he can say it. Next.
Okay. Do you want to talk about new products you're working on?
No.
No.
Here, let me build up to it, because I'd like to sort of get to the really a larger thing, which is what's going on to audio in the pandemic.
Okay.
People thinking about it, what are the consequences of it, and things like that, which I don't know how many manufacturers would really want to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I'm happy to do it because I got nothing to hide. But I think that's very timely for all of us, because we all share, this burden of the thing over us, and as does audio in its own way. So I guess the narration really starts in March. I think it was the 16th or 17th when San Francisco at least got shut down. And I learned about it at about noon, and we had to close up the company and be out of there by the end of the afternoon. My feeling about this was, this is the end of audio. Audio is luxury goods. Nobody's going to buy anything anymore. The dealers who owe us money, they're going to go out of business. We're never going to get paid. We're never going to sell what we've got. It's just doom and gloom. And I was really depressed. In fact, I had some orders planned to send to factories later that week, reorders for products. And I set that aside, saying, we just better shepherd our cash that we've got. Well, it didn't work out. It did work out that way for some manufacturers. It didn't work out that way for us. And actually, one of the good reasons for it is that guy sitting in the middle there, the one on the left, who took this, that one. Well, you give, but you keep him happy, so that's good. So what happened? There was a miserable month. I mean, we didn't make any money. We lost a little money. and we were told that I think we were off 40% from the year before in March, which was not even a half a month at that point. But I was told that colleagues and friends would have been thrilled to have that performance because some of their companies were down 80 and 90%, and some of them didn't exist. So what we didn't anticipate was that this pandemic would be the kindest thing that could have happened to us. And I don't feel guilty about the fact that we're succeeding because I know how much pleasure we're bringing to people who can afford, the products that we have and make their lives better. And so we found ourselves in a very different position. April was a pretty good month. May killed it. I think, Phil, if I'm right, it was the best May in the company's history by a substantial margin. And it kept on going from there, and it's continued to go like that. And it's true for a lot of other companies, some not, some not so much. An enormous challenge for us, trying to catch up with supply, trying to do what we're doing with the same size staff that we had before then, and a lot of other things of that sort that just make everything pressurized. I think our situation is semi-unique, and we probably got a better share of all these people wanting to buy our product because of the trust factor in us. And our dealers, many of whom are very, very long-standing relationships, were so pleased, that they could stay in business, and they didn't want to disappoint a customer, so they started recommending Parasound even more than before. We, at the same time, lurking in the background were some very, very big dealers that we've been talking to for quite a while, and came to fruition with orders that we'd never dreamed of having, opening orders, not just our first order. So we found ourselves very, very short on merchandise, and that's been on and off for us now for a year, and it seems like we're always playing catch up. If an ocean container comes in and it doesn't even get to go to the pallet racks out in the warehouse, it goes through QC and it's already sold, it gets shipped out. On top of that, what's happened in a lot of industries, not just audio, anything electronics or anything that uses electronic parts, whether it's automobiles or refrigerators, that's gotten really messed up. And we're learning longer and longer. It's not unusual for some of our parts to take 5 months to get. The filter caps that go into a JC1 Plus, or original JC1, which aren't made for any other company, it takes them 8 months after we pay them in full for it. So now we're finding run-of-the-mill parts so hard to get, you can't bribe people enough to get ahead of the line. We're finding an additional 2 months plus on everything, and we needed that product before that added 2 months. So it's going to be quite an adventure for us, and very, very frustrating for all of us. It's a hard message to deliver. I know we're not alone, but I suspect that we were getting a better piece of people's interest and money than many others. And we're trying to accomplish this as a small company. We could hardly offer the size of volume as a large company could. There's one thing that we did do in the midst of all of this, and this is really consistent with the motto I came up with at our 35th anniversary, was integrity endures. Well, one way integrity endures is to keep doing what you're doing best for a very long time without compromising. So if you read the development process for the JC1 Plus that I wrote, it's actually pretty interesting reading. There's some key Toshiba parts that were discontinued probably going on 30 years ago, but they were never duplicated. They were originally made for military, where the noise level had to be really, really low. And when Toshiba quit making them, they scrapped the dies, so nobody else could copy them. So we found there's only several people in the industry. Nelson Pass is one; he's got them. Air Acoustics is one, and we're one.
You don't know.
I recently.
This is fascinating.
I'm not going to tell you the exact amount of money, but I bought enough of these parts to last us for 6 years with an estimated growth rate. And the amount of money that was sent there for these parts was pretty close to $200,000. I don't know very many small audio companies that have $200,000, period. But I thought it was important enough because the product is important enough and our relationships are important enough that the product deserves to continue on the same basis that it's been built with the best possible of anything. So it wasn't even a question. And I just sent that money off because I didn't want to lose any of that opportunity. I think this is another way that, that we're different than others. You're getting a little bit more behind the scenes, but you're in the Bay Area, your family, I'm sure you're not going to tell your wives what we're talking about. But it is something that is quite unique to us. Just because you don't have a wife doesn't mean you can laugh, buddy.
Hey, Richard, what's your top selling? What are your top selling products now? And have you seen the demographic of the buyer change? Has that evolved with COVID?
I'm going to defer to Phil because he has all that stuff memorized.
Phil?
Phil.
Oh, there you go. Well, thank you.
Is he on mute?
It's yours.
Hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. We continue to be pleased with the response to the JC1 pluses. We're selling a remarkable number of monoblock power amps, even though it is our most ambitiously priced product to date. That tells us the market is very strong for a value-conscious monoblock power amplifier. Still doing very well with the Hint 6, the $3,000 integrated, which we are able to supply. We are also doing very well with the 200 integrated, which is the $1,200 integrated amp that we introduced, I believe in 2019 at the Rocky Mountain Show. That one is a little bit more delayed in terms of the parts issues that Richard was discussing earlier. We're seeing a remarkable resurgence in phono preamps, all up and down the line, from our Z Phono at $199 all the way up to the JC3 Plus at $29.95.
Which we haven't been able to keep in stock.
I have to imagine that, like Phil Conley, a lot of people are really starting to purchase new turntables, new cartridges, and the complementary vinyl buying that appears to be going on now. As one of those, I am guilty as charged. I must have $300 or $400 or $500 of back orders at the elusive disc that I'm waiting to have shipped to me. So other members of the Audiophile Society can comment, but this vinyl resurgence appears to have some very, very strong legs going on right now. And we are grateful that we've got 4 preamps at assorted price point and performance point levels that we can offer.
And so do you keep track of the demographics of your buyers? Have you seen changes at all?
No.
We try to, but that's one of the areas where we would want to see the SFAS get intimately involved. It's no secret that we need to continue to attract a newer, younger demographic. And until last year, we were seeing at the regional shows, which is kind of a gauge for us, we were seeing younger people not only coming in with their wives and girlfriends and partners, but also coming in with their children, which for us as Parasound, celebrating our 40th anniversary, is really gratifying to know that we are able to reach a younger demographic. So I'd like to kind of spin that one around and ask SFAS, what is the group doing to attract the younger demographic? Maybe you can address that, Leslie.
We're trying to attract more women and younger people. So
how are you doing that?
We want more women.
I know.
How are you doing that, Leslie?
It's hard. It's hard. I think we were trying to do some social media outreach. I think we were going to try, and this is kind of pre-COVID. We haven't done as much during COVID, although what we post on YouTube, I think, is potentially going to a broader audience than normal, right? If we're just having events, you've got the 30 or 50 people at the events. And that's kind of all people thought of as the audiophile society. But now that we're doing these Zoom events, I think that actually is helping with our outreach. I mean, we'll see. We do have, I think, some new female members, and I've seen some younger people. And of course, when we're all out there, and like when we go to restaurants, like we met a waiter at a restaurant the other day, probably 24 years old. This kid, like, he started collecting vinyl, I don't know, just a couple years ago. And he's like, I've got 700 records now. And he was super excited about it. I'm like, well, you need to be, getting serious, get into the audio stuff. So we're all out like we're missionaries, just trying to bring more young people in. And a lot of them, they just don't, like, they kind of are audiophiles. They just don't recognize it or know that there's the society that exists. But I do think we want to broaden it. And where I was getting at is, I would think that what I had seen, like with my college age sons, is they had told me that they saw more turntables in the women's rooms than the men's. So there are a lot of women, I think, that are getting into vinyl, which is kind of cool. And I was just curious to see if you had kept track of that at all, because you do a pretty decent volume. So
I will note, Leslie, that we are getting a lot of responses from the YouTube channels, and these folks tend to be typically a much younger demographic than we're used to. And we are finding that they are in turn spreading the message, because obviously their demographic is younger, that they are actually and actively sequestering and bringing in a lot more of a younger demographic to Parasound. So we're starting to see some growth in the younger demographic, for which we're grateful, because obviously we need that to continue this.
We do.
I'd like to add something to this, because it's along the same lines. The relative strength of companies like Music Direct, Audio Advisor, Crutchfield, and others is a real boon for women, because, and this has been going on for as many years as there's been audio. Women would go into a store and get ignored. It's just the way it was for the most part. You couldn't buy anything because you'd be dismissed and not serious. Well, the online retailers don't have that prejudice, or just craziness, and so women get treated as well as anybody should be, without any reluctance or whatever people demonstrate. So the strength of those companies, the good ones, is really timely for us, because we can't depend on the brick and mortar stores to put the best foot forward for whether it's females or younger people. They often just get ignored. So I think this is also to our favor, that we've got some really strong partners.
So you brought up an interesting point, brick and mortar versus online sales. How do you feel about that, having grown up kind of in the brick and mortar sales side? Where do you feel sales go in the future?
Oh, I think there will be very, very few brick and mortar stores, and they're going to be remarkably important big stores that are basically worth getting there to have that experience. But there aren't going to be that many of them, and it's going to be largely driven by internet. The downside is you don't get to audition something before you've bought it. And that's what generally, creates the excitement, is the opportunity to actually hear it. I'm going to give you just a small anecdote. When I was managing the Pacific Stereo store on Market Street, there's a group of people in one of the sound rooms listening to whatever it was, and I was in the room, and the demo came to an end, and I was just lurking around to hear what these four people who'd been sitting on the floor were saying. And I thought, well, they're going to talk about the merits of the demo or the product. That isn't all what was going on. They were talking about giving up their individual apartments, move in together so they could afford what they had just heard. And so I think, that can't have been a one-off experience, but I think that the number of stores that are available And that really, first of all, you can't go into a store and see everything. There used to be a store would have a pretty good range of brands and price points. Stores can't afford to do that. Manufacturers are reluctant to give people loaners, on long term, because they'll never get them back. And an example, well, no, I'm not going to go there. So I don't think it's going to be very, very few brick and mortar stores that really get it, that'll earn the business of young people and women.
Yeah, and unfortunately, COVID has really not been good for brick and mortar stores, obviously, especially for high-end audio. It's been terrible. And so what we've tried to do is, we get loaners and we pass them around the Audiophile Society so people can try things, or we go to each other's houses. And other than that, we had some questions about which shows you're going to attend. Expona, RMAF, Pacific Audio, are you going to be at any of these?
Pacific Audio's dead, isn't it?
I can address
I'm
that.
going to defer to Phil because he's really got the roadmap for this.
Good, thank you. Regrettably, we just got an email from Lou and Gary that because of recent COVID
Got to
restrictions,
turn off my phone.
the inaugural Pacific Audio Fest for 2021 has been canceled and rescheduled for 2022. I must say, I was excited to be there July 30th because it would have been our first show well over a year.
Yeah.
But not to be. And to their credit, they were firm on their decision. They're not going to be waffling and saying, we're going to try and shove it into third or fourth quarter of next year. Because as a privately held audio company, if all of the shows are now going to be shoving all of their events into the fourth quarter, as a manufacturer with limited resources, we're going to have to pick and choose which shows we attend. And at this point, as I responded privately to somebody, RMAF, if it goes forward, we've already reserved the same room we had last year. Expona, because it's occurring at about the same time within 2 weeks, we're going to have to consider whether or not that is a reality for us. But we are committed to RMAF, and we are probably going to commit to the Capital Audio Fest by virtue of our East Coast counterpart, Joe Finn, assuming all these shows are in fact going to move forward.
Yeah, and I had heard that the home entertainment show in Southern California was going to be in June, but they said they are, but I don't know if you've heard anything about that, or it seems too soon to me.
It appears to be unlikely, and we're going to have to take all of these with the understanding that, depending on the dynamics of the pandemic, are going to have to be adjusted. And our only hope as a manufacturer, and certainly as SFA, SF members who are going to plan on attending these shows, that they aren't wishy-washy and they don't keep pushing it out. And I really do tip my hat to Lou and Gary for saying, look, we're done with 2021. We're not going to push it forward, we're going to move it to 2022, and we should be in better shape.
Okay, well, that's we didn't know that, so thanks for sharing that with us, because
we were looking forward to seeing you and the Southern Oregon contingent of the SFAS,
the extreme Northern California Audio
right.
Society.
Yes.
well, if you can all come here to my house and we can hang out and listen to as much music as you want.
There we go. Well, thank you for that.
And
I'll
we'll
pick
all
you up
come
on
over and just hang out by the pool or something. So
Good.
yeah.
Make our own audio show.
Leslie, can I jump in? And I want to ask Richard just one question. We've been talking about the upper end of the John Curl products. We haven't talked about the JC5. And I really think that's a lesser known and extraordinary product that people should know more about, that can't afford the utter ridiculous ends of audio, but the JC5 is just a hot screaming stereo amplifier. So Richard, if you want to say anything.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. We could certainly talk about it more. The JC5 was popular from the first day, but what really got into high gear was a JC1 Plus. Because a pair of JC5s, running as mono boxes, a whole lot less expensive than a pair of JC1 Pluses. And for a lot of people, it'll make them very happy. I recall when, Phil, when you wrote, you were comparing it to the original JC1, and there were some things about the high end that I think you actually preferred in the JC5, if I remember that correctly.
I was a little irritated that you brought out a product that was better than the ones I already had. Yes. But I was delighted for you.
That's job security for Phil. What are you talking about?
Thank you very much.
So the fact of the matter is that the JC5 is doing splendidly, even though we haven't really, talked about it very much, but it's selling steadily and people were getting love notes for it. It's a hell of a product. And at that price, it's a steal. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. All right, Leslie, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just.
No. And I think we're kind of around the halfway point. So if anybody else wanted to hop in and ask a question, you feel free. And then I think we have another.
You want me to take Fred's thing that's on the
Yes,
screen?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's a perfect question. We ask ourselves that a lot in our product planning meetings. The fact is that the JC1, which ran for over 15 years unchanged, the last one built sounded just like the first one built, which is something I don't think many companies would want to even attempt. What made it more expensive were a number of things. Well, first of all, inflation. So that's a given. But there are certain things in there. There's an extra pair of the Nishikon caps that we buy uniquely that are really expensive. So it's got 6 caps in it, instead of 4. It's got newer parts in it. The power transformer on a JC1 Plus represents 36% of the total weight of a JC1 Plus. So it's much, much more beefy and much, much more expensive. Even a proprietary, well, not proprietary, a very difficult to find core material that actually comes from Sri Lanka, certain characteristics that make it ideal for a product like that. Other new parts, other refinements, everything about it was revisited. The chassis is the same because we don't tend to change chassis when we don't need to. But we've totally relaid out the interior boards. It now has 24 output devices instead of 18, and on and on and on. And every single part of it is more refined. So in my view of it, and what I've been told is that looking at today's marketplace, the price of a JC1 Plus is actually a better value than a JC1 was for what's about half the price of JC1. But again, going way back in time, because it's that much of a better amplifier. So tooling, no, we save money. We didn't have to tool very much, just some of the parts and internal parts. Chassis, same. Heat sinks, same. Which is how we can keep prices down. We don't have to change things that aren't broken, that are perfectly adequate. And I did break a rule. I had a rule that nothing we sold would weigh over 100 pounds. Thinking about the people in the factory who have to build them and have to haul them around, the people who pack them, the shipping companies that aren't very kind to things that are that heavy, our warehouse manager, our staff, and ultimately end users. And we just thought that's a good place. Well, we couldn't get all of a JC1 Plus into its packing material. So I think it comes out at 109, I think, Phil, is the gross weight for it. So I missed that target. Sorry?
I think it's 104 pounds.
Okay, so I missed by a little bit, but it is the better amplifier, and can't look backwards to the JC1 in the used market is still a fantastic bargain for anybody who doesn't have the wherewithal of buying JC1 Pluses. I hope that answers the question.
We had a question from Hugh. Have you thought about building streamers?
Yeah, we have. We aren't. Next. Here's the deal. this is a topic of conversation inside Parasound that is on all the time. There are several reasons. It actually boils down to this.
Oh, good. I don't need
The
to-
first is, what can we do to make a better streamer than somebody else? And it's more than just, throwing a John Curl output stage on it or something like that. We tend to do our best work with copper, aluminum, and steel. Streamers are silicon. Silicon varies very quickly. Shareholders in these big companies want new chips all the time, which is why you see so many new features on Japanese, surround products. And it's very much shifting sand. You can get a perfectly good streamer for under $150. We couldn't even have a meeting about it for $150. So that's number one. Number two is a deep concern of whether we can service and support the product to the extent that we do our existing products. Anything that has to do with the computer, networking, anything like that is a real headache. A lot of those conversations are very, very protracted. I'll give you a simple example. The original Hint integrated had such that every time Microsoft had a Windows 10 update, which they didn't announce, it would no longer work on DSD. And we had to ferret that out. So we developed a whole video pictorial. This is what you do, this is what you do, and then it's okay. We'd have people calling and say, no, it doesn't work. And it would always be that they didn't turn something off at exactly the right point that was instructed. These weren't dummies, but we don't have the staff. I don't perceive having the staff that can hold hands to the extent that I think anything like a streamer would be. That isn't saying that it isn't going to be simpler, that it's possible in the end, but it would have to be profitable in a way that really means not at the cost of value for a consumer. And we have to be able to support it the same way we do right now. It's a long answer to a short question, but that's what it boils down to.
Okay, we had another question from Brian. Did you consider vacuum tubes in an amp design?
Well, the reality is, John Curl believes that a vacuum tube is a better device than a solid state. However, it doesn't live in a friendly environment. And if the world was perfect, we would make vacuum tube amplifiers, given that they weren't so fragile, that they didn't have a lifespan. I can't imagine enough time in the day to talk about tube rolling with people. And we could, but leave that to other people to do. I think for us to do that would be a distraction from what our core business is. And again, lots of questions. I don't want to be taking calls all day. Well, should I get this one or that one or whatever? I'll leave that to the people who are with better temperaments and facility to handle that. That laugh was sincere.
Okay, did you want to talk about the Class D versus AB amps?
Yeah. I'm really
Are we there now?
Well, I think some Class D is extraordinary. And one of the examples of it is our own Zone Master 2350, which we didn't have any high hopes for it in particular. We just knew that we needed something that would have more favorable temperature for custom installers. And before we started building these, I sent some prototypes out to people with pretty good ears. Jack Vadd, who is the senior engineer and producer for the San Francisco Symphony, Leslie Ann Jones up at Skywalker, and some other people around the country. And they said, this is amazing. Now, what recording engineers, mixers like isn't necessarily what people are going to like at home, but they were just knocked out by the silent backgrounds, the utter clarity of it. We were very surprised. And in some ways, we had some interesting comparison at the office, comparing this $2,500 retail fill, if I recall,
2350
versus an A21.
Yeah,
Shall we?
$1,300 retail.
Giving it away?
Well,
Okay.
that's what you
I love
suggested.
that. Okay, so we had the whole staff listening to prototype of this alongside an A21, which is a real perennial killer. And I would have expected it would have been night and day bloodshed, and it wasn't actually like that at all. It held its own. And for the money, thank you for correcting me, there's nothing close to it. And I would have, in fact, I just recommended to somebody writing in who had a heat problem in a system. He's got a JC2 BP and other Parasound equipment. And he's going to addition a 2350, which solves his problem. And I know he's not going to be disappointed. And yet things continue going on. There's Bruno Putzis, who I've known for a long time, is making the a new Purify, which is a very advanced Class D solution. It's not necessarily the last one in the world, but it's going to continue to get better. But I think there's always going to be an affection for the harmonic structure of what a good Class AB amplifier does, and we intend to proceed with that route as long as we possibly can. There may be someday that we're going to find an amplifier where we'll give people a choice. X amount of money. Do you want this one or that one? Just like we have, do you want silver or black? It may come to that if we get to the point where we really think these things are worthy, but certainly not writing them off. Absolutely not. Another long answer to a short question.
Oh, that's
I'm
good.
never going to get invited back again. Geez.
Okay.
Okay.
And any other new products? You're not cluing us in on any fun new stuff you're working on?
No. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, and we look at a project and we say, well, logically, it should take us this long to create, the design. It's going to take the factory that long to tool the parts and buy the pieces and all that. And because of that, we don't like to do things casually and waste anybody's time. Right now, we have some things coming. They're not unrelated to what we have now. They're in some ways better than what we have, and I believe if everything goes okay by the latter part of this year, at least one of them I know is going to be available. But it's not going to be a whole slew of products, because we really everything that we're selling is buying and is selling, and we can't build them fast enough for that demand. And so when something comes up that's really a real deal breaker, we don't know what that product would be right now, actually. But I do know that John Curl's been working on. I do know that John Curl's been working on a few things, and they're very interesting. But working with John isn't the same timeline as working with anybody else I've ever known. So these products tend to take a little bit longer. But again, I've only got the vague idea of what it is, but there's going to be something.
Oh, we had a question. What product do the Toshiba parts you're talking about go into?
These are the input stages in the JC1 Plus and in the JC5, and they're absolute unobtainium. In fact, they're actually there's only one source, and only a couple of us know what it is. You could try buying some off the internet, and they would bear no resemblance. They'd be fakes and counterfeits. So we know, because I know who bought all of these Toshiba JFETs when they were discontinued, because they were pennies then, like 15 cents a piece, and now they're big bucks. So we're very fortunate to have a really wonderful relationship with that individual, and it's going to keep us going for a long time. And meanwhile, we're sending them a lot of money, and that's making them very happy.
Okay. And where are your products assembled, manufactured?
Well, most of the design is done here. The three factories that we work with are really responsible for the mechanical designs, the tooling, and all of those things. So we work with 3 contract manufacturers. They're in Taiwan for several reasons. We had a short period in the late 80s where we tried to have some products built in China, and subsequently made another run at it to just see maybe 10 years ago. And it became very clear that the way the Chinese people work is that if a product becomes inconvenient for them, we're too demanding, they couldn't get it right, whatever it is. We could be a year and a half into a product that we've promised people, that we've got a business plan around, and they'll just say, it's too inconvenient, forget about it, go away. So being a minnow in a rather nasty ocean is not very good for a small company like us. On the other hand, the Taiwanese engineers, very different mentality. If there's a problem, they're curious, they'll chase it to ground and solve it, or we'll do that together as a matter of pride. The company that manufactures the big Halo amps, including the JC1 Plus, is a factory that I've been doing business with continuously since 1982. Let that sink in. There's never been an OEM relationship in audio, probably more than a dozen years, but that's a long time. And so we're their primary customer. They give us their very best effort. They're very reliable, and it's good to be. It's really good to be a big fish in a pond. The second of those manufacturers we've been doing business with since 1988. The third since 2007, and the gal that owns it worked for the first company that I mentioned that we started with in 1982. And we are their primary companies, and some of the OEM work we do for other companies has fallen their way. One of them was building the controllers for the Teal subsats, for example. The Wilson Audio stereo EXO controller that goes along with the $850,000 Chronosonics, and they sell for $5,000. We build it in one of those factories, and obviously, if it's good enough for them, it's going to be good enough for anybody else. So I like these little side things from time to time, but the loyalty of these factories is just amazing. And it's not always easy. And sometimes we disagree about stuff, but we always seem to wake up in the same bed. So it's really well.
Cool. So we always kind of like to ask the next couple questions. What's your system? Tell us about your system, and what music do you prefer to listen to on it?
Well, I'll start with the music. I love music, and my favorite is actually French Impressionist classical music. I don't keep up with the stuff that Phil does, but I like mostly classical music, and I like really well recorded, well thought out music. In terms of system, in flux at the moment. We moved to our country house about this time last year. And it hasn't presented itself for what loudspeakers are going to fit here that I am able to stay married. At the moment, as a stopgap, I'm using some very interesting Danish speakers. They're called Jern, J-E-R-N, which means iron. They're cast iron. Oh, here, wait a minute. Let me just take this over. Just a second.
Road trip.
Wait till you see these.
I don't know.
Whoop,
Can you see that thing on the fireplace?
no,
Now
Too far?
we see.
Wait a minute. Here, hold on.
No,
not yet,
No?
not yet. We see
Why am
you.
I doing that?
Looks like an avocado.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? It's because, okay, wait a minute. This ought to work. Hold on.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay. I recognize.
Pretty funky, huh?
Yeah.
It sounds incredible, absolutely incredible.
That's cool.
And yeah, the guy who designed these is an old friend, Ole Lund Christensen, who's been around, kicking around the rogue side of the audio business for quite a while. So I'm using that, and at the moment, I'm using a new classic 200 pre-integrated, 200 integrated rather, because that's, as an interim, that works just fine. They've got another system where in the TV room, which is probably calling to me to say, get those new Maggies. You're going to be really happy with that. So I'll keep you apprised of what happens.
And are you a vinyl person or a digital person?
I would say I'm a vinyl person on a hiatus. I've got a ton of vinyl in our warehouse, and they should really come home, and I want to get a new turntable. But I'm getting old and crotchety about getting up to turn over a record. And so I wouldn't say that I'm digital. I would just say
Post vinyl.
I'm a vinyl wannabe if things were a little better.
I can add, there aren't that many of your vinyl left at the warehouse, Richard. I'm sorry to tell you that. I have,
All here?
I've pilfered them. So if there are some missing, come and see me, all right?
I wasn't talking about the ones that, that Warner Brothers was sending us.
No. I know where your stash is.
Come down here, and
Oh.
listen to them.
I know where to find you at least.
You do.
Yeah.
So do you stream digital, or do you just play your files from like a CD format?
I stream some where I am I'm up in the hills on the east side above the town of Sonoma. And the only internet I get is from a microwave tower that talks to another tower down in town. And it's really slow. It's not the best. And I put off getting satellite because it's really, I just don't like it and it doesn't work well. So a lot of it, unfortunately, is just hardware and not being streamed. Every once in a while, there'll be something great. I just heard about a young English composer. I'll send you guys a link for it. I can't remember his name, but it's utterly incredible. I think before he was 22 years old, he'd already gotten 2 Grammys. So I'll give you a link to listen to that.
Go ahead.
And by the way, I'm not the arbiter of how things sound in the company. Phil and his teammate over here are a good part of it. I've lost a lot of hearing, got tinnitus in one ear. I am not capable of making a useful contribution to how one of our products sounds. And by the way, I want to take that for just an instant about how the product sounds. I'm going to say something and you're going to say bullshit, but you'll realize by the time I'm done with the sentence that it makes sense. We really don't voice products. We don't listen to them in the process of development. We know, because we know what they're going to be. We know the parts. We know how we put things together. We know how we route wires and all of this stuff. And the only thing that we would really be listening for is there something that's just wrong. It's not right. But we don't have a listening room at Parasound. Yeah, Phil is really tweaked about that, but he can spend his money otherwise. Because I think that in many cases, people that have listening rooms in a company tend to hear what they want to hear because they have a certain mindset of what that ought to be. I don't think it's as useful as having a cadre of people like Phil Conley and others around the Bay Area who have great systems. They've got great music collections. They've heard a lot of it, and that's much more useful for us to learn from than it is ourselves, because you get too close to it. And especially people who have a pet theory about how an amplifier should be built without the background of a John Curl. They really don't understand. They just think it should be this way. Well, it's going to sound like that way for them. So to an extent, it's actually much more effective to do what we do, and takes a little longer, but that's okay.
Okay, does anybody else have other questions? I think there's a lot of you out there. We could, what do you think about kind of the state of the industry post-COVID? I mean, it sounds like you're bullish that it's changed for the better and this is going to be consistent in the future. Is that,
Well, I think it's not that it's the growth of it may not be as robust as it is right now, because it's still on a very, very steep parabola, but it's not going to come down. But I think that as people find that they can spend money on cruises and vacations and other things, and they can get out of their house, and they may not feel, that they need to put a new system in or improve something in their system as they have now because they're home all the time, it'll probably level off a little bit, but I think it will always be at a much higher level than it was before, just because of the exposure to it. Somebody comes over to somebody's house that's got a great rig, they're a good prospect, as a new customer. So I don't think this is going to go on endlessly, but I think the ones that are successful merchants are going to continue to be very, very successful, and the ones that are holding on by a thread aren't going to be saved by it.
yeah, I think this, I'm hopeful that this new appreciation for home audio is going to stick with people. So and we do ask kind of the same question most of the manufacturers that come on, and pretty consistently they're having a banner year. So there's if nothing else, there's going to be a lot of high-end audio equipment out there. So
well, even more, because when people feel comfortable about going to their friend's house who's got this great system, which people often buy a great system because they've heard one at their friend's house. Well, those systems aren't going away. When those people experience that, I think that's going to be another wave. And it's going to go on forever. Well, not forever, but it's going to be robust.
yeah, well, I mean, if you think people in general, because they're not going into the office as much, if there's going to be more working out of the house, people are nesting more. I do think that this is really a shot in the arm for high-end audio and audio and video, basically, as people choose just to have home entertainment in general. So I'm thinking our audiophile society is going to be growing like incredibly. So.
Well, Leslie, let me ask you.
Yeah, it will be.
Has Leslie, have you noticed increase in the membership to SAFAS since the pandemic started?
Actually, that's a Larry question. He kind of keeps track of our numbers. How have our numbers changed, Larry?
So we have grown some in the past year. I don't know exactly how many. I would say probably we went from maybe 250, 275 to over 300 paid members. We have paid members that are not in California. They're joining Zoom calls like this. So yeah, we're slowly growing.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah, and what's nice, this format really has helped extend our reach in general. And I do think that, like, there's a lot of times I do meet people that just have no idea that these societies exist. And I also think that having this community, we tend to encourage each other to buy more because we're always talking about it. It's like the opposite of AA. So we're gonna join
Well
it.
played.
There we go.
Yeah, it's gonna make you want to buy more. So
Leslie is a very bad influence on us.
yeah,
Well, at least you
David.
buy more, but you'll wake up feeling okay the next morning.
exactly. You'll feel even better. It's therapy. This is, you could put your money into healthcare, or you could just buy high-end audio.
I think I drink more too. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
Leslie,
yeah.
I gotta say that, we deal with audiophile societies around the country. And, there's a certain stigma associated with audiophile societies. And I'm very pleased to say that the San Francisco group definitely breaks that stereotype
We're
because
cool.
they're
Thank you.
cool. Well,
Yeah.
you guys buy the gear that you discuss, you buy the gear that you recommend, and you share that information with your team members. And that's very different from the majority of audiophile societies around the country who let's be blunt, let's call it what it is. They tend to just kick the tires and rarely, if ever, buy anything and leave it open to intellectual discussion. So that's why these conversations with the group are so fun, because the SFAS actually does end up buying the products and auditioning them and commenting on them. So we think that's a really good sign for the group. And we hope it kind of infects the other audiophile societies around the country. So do what you can there, all right?
Don't say
Well,
infect, please.
having been,
Infect is the wrong word.
There you go.
Yeah.
Affect.
having
You
chatted
need
with
to get
a
your
number of
audiophile shot.
audiophile societies, I agree with what Phil said. And some of them, particularly back east, have some ex-reviewers who they're just off the wall with whatever it is that they say. This is an incredibly focused group of people. They enjoy it, but it's serious. And I started out by saying, music's the right thing here. That's what this is. You could call it San Francisco Music Society or whatever. It's probably already taken. But the point is, we all share that. We share that interest. And this group is more, I think, is more informed and has a better sense of perspective than several of the others that are larger and woefully lacking.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. We're definitely serious with our addiction.
And I don't think we have any qualms about admitting that we're audiophiles. We had Steve Guttenberg on a while back, and he said, his friends were always sort of shy about mentioning that they were audiophiles and were almost reticent about even admitting that they were an audiophile to other people. And it's like, well, look, I don't know anybody who has as much stereo stuff as we do who claims not to be an audiophile. When you have
Yeah.
tons of speakers and amplifiers and turntables and thousands of records, and you say you're not an audiophile, it's like, really? Where
I can't hear the difference.
And what are you?
I consider myself a hi-fi nut.
Okay, an
works.
audiophile by any other name.
Is not.
A quick question for Richard, if I may.
Yeah.
I've heard other unnamed, I will say, companies address this. What's your opinion of those of us who tend to like to restore some of the vintage equipment, i.e. the concept receivers and other items also, versus buying new? I've heard people say that that's just a waste. And I was just curious about your opinion on it.
Well, my opinion is it's great to be engaged with a product that deserves attention, and getting your hands on something that you have to make better. You're going to fix it in some way or improve it, as opposed to just buying something, is a very, very different concept. And I think there's a greater degree of attachment to it, of affection for it. It probably sounds better for those reasons. So I think that's really important. It's also nice to have keep in touch with history. And I've got every audio magazine that was ever written from 1952 up in the warehouse somewhere. And sometimes, well, when I get them down off the pallet racks, it's really fun to go back and see what the transition was. And some of these things, it's just fun to do it. And so the level of engagement, we touch, we look, and all that is very different than just, here's my credit card, take it home and plug it in. They're both great, but I do not dismiss for a moment the person that really wants to do something with something old.
Thank you.
And now, Phil, what are you showing us there?
This is, the new turntable at the Conley system, the AMG 09, with the Ortofon cartridge temporarily installed, soon to be the Grado Aeon cartridge whenever we can get Sterling back down here to install it. But it has
Nice.
been a godsend. And in retrospect, it has been interesting to have used the turntable with the cartridge that was previously on the Rega
Right.
6, because we now know the single difference that a turntable mechanical platform can do, and the difference is absolutely startling.
Yeah.
Absolutely startling. So we can't wait until Sterling, who by the way is very busy right now, can get back down here to help us install the Grado cartridge for the AMG 09.
I'd like to add something that Phil just said, which is what our relationships are with other manufacturers. And so since he mentioned Grado, they are a huge supporter of ours. I know they've got all of our phono stages. John Grado's got a JC2BP on top of other things that he's got, and they're a great source of referrals to us. And their top of line products are absolutely extraordinary. But if you read the odes to Parasound, John Chen is their sales manager, and what he writes about us is just splendid. And we have relationships like this with a lot of other manufacturers, which is really, really it's not just commercial benefit. It's just nice. Some of these people are really smart and really, really great people. And I could name off speaker manufacturers, other amplifier manufacturers. It's a nice part about the industry that doesn't really get spoken about. It's there and it's great. And getting calls, making calls. Our recent correspondence with John DeVore, who's over the moon, a really good guy, by the way. I don't know if you've ever heard of DeVore speakers, but this is a real straight shooter. And he's just wetting his pants over a product. And well, almost. He's in Brooklyn, maybe he is. But those kinds of relationships are very, very gratifying. And that goes on and on and on.
Okay. Any other questions from Phil? Did Richard hit everything you wanted?
Oh, sure.
Nothing to say anything else, yeah.
Okay. Oh, we
Yeah.
did have a question. What gear that you've let go do you miss most now? For Richard and Phil. That's a good question.
Oh,
What gear did I let go?
Yeah, that you miss the most.
Ooh. You start, Phil.
well, when I went to college, I opted to go without the vehicle because we had a fairly closed campus, and instead focus on having one of the better audio systems. And by my junior year, I was fortunate to own a pair of tri-amplified ADS L910s on the
That was the big boy.
whatever the mounts that they supplied the stands, where you could, it's kind of like a swing set, if you will. And I was obviously, once I got out of school, I needed money. I was forced to sell my ADS L910s.
You pimp.
I ended up with a pair of L810s, but it was never the same. And I regret the hell out of that decision, getting rid of my ADS tri-amplified L910s. So there you go. One of my few regrets, by the way.
So I had some very unique amplifiers. They were the prototypes of the reissue of the Marantz 8B that Kevin Hayes was making when they were down in Florida before he moved to North Carolina, as proof of concept for Marantz that they could do it, including the original output transformers, which were part of the magic of it. So I had two of them running triode on some ESL 63 US monitors for years and years and years, and finally let them go to a guy who was selling things on eBay, including a Technics SP10 with the graphite S-shaped arm, a very expensive Mac tuner, and a whole bunch of stuff. And the price he got for these was like $2,800 a piece, which was pretty good for Marantz 8Bs, and particularly prototypes that were newly built. I never saw it. The guy absconded with the money, and that was that. So
Sorry.
Yeah. So that's what I miss the most.
The money or the speed?
By the way, they were great. They were great amps. I built solid state products, but those things with the quads made me very, very happy.
Good.
That's a good story. So we
No,
should.
it's not. A
So
horrible
we
story.
should- so we should just never sell anything.